Okay, my friends, this is Roger, and this is an extremely interesting article about limestone, which they're calling a sedimentary rock composed mainly of calcium carbonate, CaCO3, calcium carbonate, usually in the form of calcite or aragonite. It may contain considerable amounts of magnesium carbonate as well as minor constituents commonly present, including clay, iron, carbonate, feldspar, pyrite, and quartz. Well, feldspar is what they would call this stuff right here. All right, that's not feldspar. That's skin. That's what they call feldspar. This is that's not feldspar. That's an egg. Now, this is body chemistry. Now, I'm going to show you the coolest thing I've seen in a long time. Hold on a second. Well, first of all, this is limestone. That's anybody that understands mud fossils understands that that's a mud fossil. It's nothing to do with limestone. I mean, it's nothing to do with sedimentary rock. No. Then we go to selenite. Right? Selenite is this right here, and that is also limestone. That's limestone, but it was in a different chemistry, okay? Which means this aqueous, watery solutions, salty, acids, whatever it's in, they create different outcomes. Now that would have been like a white limestone, you know, in some cases, if it was in a different chemistry. It depends on where it is. There's a lot of chemistry on this side and that side that causes a lot of interactions in the middle. And that's what we're getting into here when we're into changes in chemistry. So to that effect, one of my guys did this video. This is Shandon Sims. Shandon Sim, I believe is his name. I'll be certain to make sure I get that right. But he did this about, is the limestone made from missing bones in mud fossils? Or is it, as they say, accumulated shells and so forth? He did a nice job talking about the chemistry. So then he goes on to do this, which this one blew me away. Now, we're going to go through this, only a few minutes. I'm going to go through it, and I may explain here and there if it needs to be done. But what I have right here, this is a noto. All right, can you see all this here? Let me see if I can back here a little bit. All right, that's a noto. Now, we have discovered new species, and I think that's what he has here is a noto. And what he did was he soaked it in scale remover, which is nothing more than he's deconstructing the biology. So normally you'd wash it down with something like that, but he soaked it in there. Now, I've never done that. I really don't even wash them down with any chemistry, to be honest with you. I just use water because I never wanted to affect the chemistry. But there's so much to see as he dissolved it away. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, watch this. I'm going to let him talk. Here goes.
Okay, so I've been soaking these, well, I soak most of them with limestone. I soak them in
All right, now, you see this? Do you see these layers? That is layers. We are built in layers. Now, I'm almost sure this is a foot, and this is the bottom of the foot. It has a lot of structural integrity, a lot of strapping on the bottom. And I can show you that, and I will in toes, and everything else has the same, it has the same strapping toughness in your grip skin, it's called. And the other parts are not quite so structurally built as this, and I'll let it go. Here it goes.
Phosphate.
See, I think that's the bottom of a foot like this. This is like this part right here, this type of thing. And he's dissolved all this away, and you have all of this toughness down here. That's where you walk on. And this has to be tough. Now, and then he's going to show you, well, anyway, here goes.
The chemical reaction usually only lasts about just a couple minutes, if that. But these have been.
Well, he just said the chemical reaction when he usually washes them. And again, I don't do this, so I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of experience here. He's the guy that understands this better than I do. He says it normally only lasts a little while. Well, this was very reactive, apparently, is what he also says, and you'll hear him say this. And the reason it was very reactive, as you can see, it somehow is not as aged, or it was in a certain chemistry that kept it softer than other more in a reactive stage. But anyway, it dissolves. So here goes.
Boiling down or reacting for well over an hour. This, man, I wish you could see it better, but.
All right, now you see the top here? You see this? And you see this coming over the side and over the side and like this. That's something that is like attaching to that upper chemistry. This is fascinating because I've never seen it dissolve like this. You see that? That one there is like, you see it coming strapping right up there, and that sucker wrapped in there solid. That's a band of attachment.
I'm gonna be able to pull that's almost a.
See it? That gives you the ability to. I'm sure that's probably a tendon attachment there.
It's almost a live sample. Same with this one.
Now you had another one
this
here
stuff
too.
Right here, I put it in there. I thought this was gonna react, but no. Everything else is reacting to it, and you can see like it's like a shell starting to come off. And the more reaction it has, like the more I guess.
Again, there's this is tendinous, strappy. Look at this. You know, it needs to be really examined, and I should start playing around with this technique because it's pretty interesting.
Starting to look more like real tissue.
Sure is.
It's crazy. Anyways, I'm gonna keep soaking them. I'll keep you updated. Update on those. Don't know if maybe it just finally ran out of acid or what, but as you can see, this one.
Now I believe this is where the blood supply is. I'm gonna see if I can stop it. Like, I believe this is blood. That's where the blood enters here. Maybe, you know, artery in a vein or something. But see what it does. Whatever he's putting on here, and I know what it is. It's scale remover. It's the stuff that's supposed to eat the scale off of your toilets and stuff. We're made out of hard water. It's amazing. It's true. We are made out of hard water. He's got something that removes hard water, scale. Look at that. Fascinating. Look at that. And in between there's, well, here, let me show you something. Excuse the mess, but look at it. It won't take a second here. Oops. All right, you see this here? That's the same sort of stuff where you've got everything. We're built in layers. We're built in layers. You see that layer of red there? That's a layer of red blood. That right there is a layer of red blood. That whole layer right there, that tissue layer. I mean, layer of, it's red blood. And every one of these is a layer and a layer and a layer. And then you get all the way up to the grip skin layer, which is this top layer. That's a real That's what they would call old red sandstone. That is skin. And it's infused with all of the real tough stuff of your outside skin. This is what you present to the rest of the world, and it's grippy and it's tough and it's scratchy, and once it all hardens up. But inside of you is this, is all the tissue layers, and then in between several layers of tissue you get a layer of blood, and then another layer of blood, and so forth. That's how it services the tissue. Alright, so Shandon takes this stuff, something like this, Holmes lime scale formation, home water plant scale remover. Now, what is hard water is created by the chemical weathering or dissolving of rocks. That's us. In lakes, rivers, reservoirs, and wells, we are nothing more than hard water. Now, you saw how he dissolved those things. So I'm looking around at my stuff and I'm thinking, what can I dissolve around here? Which I probably won't do it, but I should. Now, the lungs are like this. I'm thinking, well, maybe I could dissolve it. What am I going to see? I'm going to see that. Now, so then I got a chest. This is a guy's chest. This is the front of the lungs. And it's eroded away and it was laying like that. Now, this is his back. It's still got some of the bones and bits and pieces of the bones of the ribs in the back. It would have been going like this. And that's all the blood leaking from the lung, which is nothing more than a bag of blood. And you can see the lobes of the lung here. This might be kind of interesting to take a look at. It's a guy's back. It's his whole back. Well, it's his whole body, this section of his body. The flesh, of course, comes off a lot easier than the structural parts. And then I have another lung. This one here has been DNA certified. I'm not going to do this one, but that would probably come down, because let me show you what happens inside the lungs. All right, that's this lung here I have up in the monitor here. I can get a good close-up of it. You see, they all have this fabric. That's the fabric of life, and that's on every one of these mud fossils. And it depends on what kind of chemistry it was in, whether it might turn like this. It's still in there. That fabric is still in there. This is a heart. And that's the seam of the heart. Now, I had one of my guys, Phil Harris, found one like this and snapped it like this. It cracked open. The blood was still in there. So there's a lot of stuff, I'm showing bits and pieces. You could take a bone like this. That's a bone. If you find them in fine, wet mud that has, pretty much been wet forever, the damn things are like perfect. I mean, look at this. This one here, when I took it out of the ground, it looked virtually like a piece of meat. I mean, I'll show you a couple of shots of all of these things in the pictures. Hold on. By the way, this is mud fossil I made. Now, this only was a few months. I don't know, maybe 6 months or so. I took it out and took a picture of it. But what I did was I took chicken tissue. This is chicken tissue, and that's the fascia-looking stuff. And this is just the fleshy outer skin. And it started to grow crystals according to the transition metals that are present in certain areas in the skin. And the reason it does that is because it was in salty, sandy, muddy water, and I put a little bit of electricity through it, a DC current, about 12 volts, just let it run through the water. And that's in the current of the earth, telluric currents. That's exactly the same sort of thing. It's not exactly 12 volts or anything, but it's a voltage that is sucked to the earth, and that's the cause of gravity too. is the suction of electrons to earth. I cover that in other places. But you see how this is starting to really start to get to be what we see in mud fossils. These are what happens is the mud fossils. So I'm not making anything that's not real. And it doesn't take long. So anyway, I just threw that in. Hold on. Now there's a couple of lungs. That one there gushed blood. That blood just dripped on the counter. I mean, literally. This one here, DNA certified, human. It's what it was. All right, this is blood. It's inside of a lung. This was cracked open from a lung. Some of these come out just absolutely saturated blood. You see the one that Gary Evans found over in England. I'll show you that one. But you can see this is it's what it is. If it should be looked at, somebody see what it is, and then we'll go from there. But to treat these things like they're just rocks is not the way to go forward here. All right, some of this stuff is extremely fresh looking, but I'm going to tell you, that is ancient. Now, Gary Evans found this in a salt flat, pulled it out, brought it home. It was like this. I mean, that's a bloody lung. That's the part that's the deoxygenated blood. That's the red blood side. Now, a couple weeks later, it was dust. All right, see, that's when it was pretty new. Okay, that's a couple weeks of just being dry, and it turns into dust. Now, I've always said it's the conditions, and the conditions are that it should be somewhere in the salt area, 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, right in that area, which is the body's salt conditions, and moist, and out of the sunlight, and in very fine, it's called platypolar silicates. It's the finest mud. That will seal it and protect it, and they'll last almost forever. And then when they dry out, bing, very quickly that happens. All right, Phil Harris, a friend of mine, found this heart. He went out in 15 minutes to decided to see if he could find mud fossils. Boop, finds this heart. And first of all, he finds it's solid. And I believe this is exactly what he has here. Now, and that is a little dimple right here. And that little strip is what runs right down. That little hook is left over here. And he snapped it here and it popped off the top. They have this fabric and it runs all the way around. See, it's a seam that runs. And he snapped it and it popped off. And that's where that red blood is. I believe that's exactly the same spot as this. So anyway, just another example of mud fossils, how fresh they can really be. Okay, this is looking down on Phil's cracked open heart, and the red blood now has turned, you know, well, you can see the color. And the reason is it gets oxygenated, it gets oxidized. And this was only after an hour or so in air. So things change quickly when they come out of the mud fossil conditions. And it's a very interesting study. A lot of exploration to be done here, and it's something that's very new and not understood. So you can't rely on the old knowledge here. You have to start over. Now, this is a rock. When it first came out of the ground, it looked literally like it was a piece of meat. I mean, seriously. Now, if that maybe at that point was put into that solution, you might be able to see all of the different investments of everything. I would think it'd be fascinating to try this technique. You know, I'm getting a little beyond more experimentation on my own, but I'd like to see everybody else start to you know, at some point everybody's going to have to start to look into this because it's reality. So I don't want to be the only one doing it. And Shandon is coming on board here, and I have a bunch of other people, Tyson and Scott Wiles and Greg Morrison, and I have a bunch of other people. I'm not going to mention everybody's name. I can't. But it's time for opening up this, expanding this into, you know, this is fascinating stuff. And see, if this was melted down, it's going to look like this. It's virtually the same thing. It's a fascinating topic, to me anyway. I know a lot of people just have no interest whatsoever, and that is hard for me to understand. I can accept it. I mean, it's what it is. But mostly they dismiss it and say you're an idiot, and that's why they're not interested. And if that's the case, then I would change and turn around and look and say, well, let me see, who's the idiot? Well, you know, I think I've presented so much evidence, there's no way you could possibly dismiss it. The only way you can dismiss it is to think you're too smart to believe anything that is so far different from what you were taught. And that means that you are not smart at all. In my world, that means that you have lost the ability to become smart.